So it was only really an amount of time before I get clocked by the algorithm, and I'm starting to get advertised things that, well, they seem kind of helpful in some ways. I'm getting a lot of productivity advertisements on social media. I'm getting advertisements for like that brick thing where you put a little brick on like your fridge or whatever, and then you can't unlock your phone. All these methods to help us to get away from our phone addiction, social media addiction. I'm writing a lot. I'm writing a novel right now. I'm very excited to share in the future, but I'm getting ads for keyboard, monitor, little setups that have no access to internet. Today I wanted to talk about the concept of productivity and hustle culture a little bit. There are many videos out there on the concept of productivity and supposed hustle culture. The proponents and opponents of these positions have made themselves clear. The advocates encourage a hustle culture that speaks to the reality that, well, if you want to get better at something, you're gonna have to do the work. There's no way around it. There's no one that's going to do the work for you. Sure, yeah, you can have AI that does the work for you. But if you actually yourself want to improve at the skill, there's no way out. You have to do it yourself. And so a lot of people find empowerment in this. You have the power to make this sort of change, build these habits, to build the skills that you want to improve at. Of course, there's downsides with the grind set hustle culture that have been detailed at length through other videos and articles and essays and so on. Probably the most potent argument against it is that there's no guarantee that the harder you work, the more success you'll find. You can work really hard on a subject or a discipline that's just not in demand, and you're not going to be able to make much money. The other side, the anti-hustle culture people, have a strong position in that the conditioning that we face to work super hard, to hustle, it's largely built on a sort of Puritan idea of a work ethic. A lot of people point to this as a problem with capitalism. Capitalism really ingrains us to work really, really hard. Much of labor history and socialist history in this country and all over the world really is built on ideas of rest, on actually doing the opposite of hustling, to be able to have time to nurture yourself, to do the things that you want to do. Of course, the reverse problems are present here. Just because you don't want to hustle, to grind at a skill, doesn't mean you're going to get better at it by not doing it. You know, the recognition of the pressure from capitalism, it doesn't really do anything to encourage us to learn new things. So I think it's really tempting to try and take a middle ground here. There must be some middle ground somewhere between hustling as hard as you can and rest. We can often do better at allowing ourselves some mediation or some respite from our work, and also to encourage ourselves to build better habits. However, I would argue that these conversations are becoming eternal. The middle ground has largely become unattainable through contemporary forces. The world we live in today will make it so that we will actually never be able to resolve this issue. Now, when a new technology or phenomenon is introduced to the world, it's tempting to look towards the current professional community for answers. Sometimes this is extremely powerful. During the height of the COVID crisis, I was very happy that the professional anti-pandemic community was working hard to build a fix, a vaccine, as fast as possible. And there were no shortcuts. Sure, we have had a lot of theory and research in the past, but they had to build a vaccine without a sort of template of exactly what that vaccine would look like. However, there's a certain beauty to the plague, as horrible as that sounds. We know what we need to do to fix it, and it's in our faces, right? Our world can't go on the way we want it to unless we fix this massive problem hitting us all. However, many of the problems that we're dealing with today, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's climate change, these problems have groundings that are a little bit more dubious. We don't really know where they come from. we can sort of trace a loose history, but we don't really have a grounding for how to think of these technologies, how to think of technology as a whole. That's not to say that we don't have thoughts and research about it. We have plenty of it, which is something that I'll get into in a little bit, but it's that it's not as pressing to our lives. We don't go around every day feeling like, man, we just really need to make sure we solve climate change. We need to mitigate the climate crisis, because if we don't, I can't do my favorite thing next weekend. You know, I can't go to this basketball game, right? I can't hang out with my friends, right? That sort of pressure that the COVID pandemic put on us did a lot for speeding up the process of remediating the issues. So I think in terms of the concept of productivity, we are definitely dealing with a latter concept. Something that has been pondered and thought about for a very long time in different ways, but it's not something that is easily tangible or something that we're immediately trying to solve. I believe that this problem of productivity and anti-productivity will never be solved because we have become fundamentally detached from our own creativity. One of the primary ignitions in building our own creativity and sense of self in this world is through education. Education is a large umbrella encompassing a host of different acts and modes of interacting with our environment. From an early age, we learn what it means to learn about and tinker with the world. When we are younger, when we are in earlier schooling, in kindergarten, even preschool, early elementary school, we learn to tinker with the world and imagine and play in the world in a way that makes sense. When we go out and play with our friends on the playground, our play we don't have a conception of productivity in mind. It's not something that we're thinking, oh, I need to play harder, or I need to be more gentle with myself. I need to let myself be more free. In a sense, we are already free. We are doing what we're naturally inclined to do. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the world doesn't have access to preschool or these sort of fundamental learning possibilities at a young age, which I think is extremely tragic. But regardless, by the time students get to high school, most of the students despise it or heavily dislike it. It's a burden on our lives. We go, I remember when I was in high school, it was like, oh, I got to wake up in the morning again. I got to go do this, rinse and repeat. I got to do this homework. It's all these things I got to do. But whatever happened to that, oh my God, I get to go to school and go hang out with my friends and work on a creative project that I really, really enjoy. These sort of inclinations of joy have disappeared for many kids as they get older. Now, you could think that, well, this is the fault of the educators. You know, why aren't the educators still engendering that sense of creativity? And a lot of educators, a lot of teachers are doing their damnness to do that as much as they can. However, teachers and school boards and principals and parents especially have this motivation that their kid needs to be prepared for what it's like to live in the, quote, real world of sorts. They need to be able to find a job. They need to be able to exist in the world with a set of skills that are going to make sense. This, in turn, inherently limits the creativity or educational inclinations that students might have more naturally based on their interests or what the community interests are. When I was in college, I studied philosophy, and it was a common thing that I heard. It was like, oh, you might as well be studying underwater basket weaving, you know, like if you're studying something so incredibly useless. Now, I would probably argue that if there's anything we need more of right now, it's critical thinking about the myriad of extremely horrifying consequences of our postmodern world. But nonetheless, they were largely right. It's tough to find a job in philosophy, right? What does that even mean? I've been able to make most of my money through nonprofit fundraising. It's been the majority of the money that I've been able to make. What's interesting here, though, and I think this is sort of the crux of what I'm getting at in this section, is that this sort of projection that parents, educators, and so on make of these are the practical skills and these are the non-practical skills are subject to be wrong. And we are now seeing this in dramatic form with computer science students. When I was in college, it was like, oh, you should be a computer scientist, right? That's where all the jobs are. But as I'm sure many of you know, that's not really the case anymore. Junior computer science jobs are way less in demand than they used to be. Now, while I'm tempted to sort of laugh in their face and be like, ha ha ha, you said I was the useless discipline. Look at you now. Obviously, that's not conducive to anything productive. In many ways, we should have sympathy for these people who thought they were going to be entering in a promising field and a promising life, and it's sort of fallen on its face. One of my favorite philosophers was a American philosopher, American pragmatist named John Dewey, who spent a lot of time working on education, on philosophy, on pragmatism, the sort of metaphysics of it all, and so on. But he wrote a book in the 1910s called Democracy and Education. In my opinion, it's one of the best books of trying to sort of link democracy as it should be, not what we have it now, right? Like, we like in America to say, oh, we live in a democracy, right? We live in this free world of sorts. It's not true at all. Most of us have to go to work every day to a boss that tells us what to do. We have no democratic say in our workplaces. Elections are bought out. They're rigged by multi-billionaires that buy the results for the most part. But real democracy, real participatory democracy, something that we don't have but many are striving towards, linking that with education and sort of tracing the student, the child, as they grow up and to participate in the democracy as a whole. I want to talk about one chapter in Democracy and Education. It's called Labor and Leisure. I think it's a pretty phenomenal chapter, and it talks a lot about what I'm concerned about in terms of productivity. First, he starts by referencing the ancient Greeks, and particularly Aristotle, which is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I think he gets a little bit more of a pass because, he wrote this in the early 1900s, but I get so sick of people starting their history with the ancient Greeks. It just reeks of so many bad things. That history did not start with the ancient Greeks. we don't need to do this anymore. But anyways, for the sake of his argument, he makes a pretty good one. He talks about how labor and leisure were understood in ancient Greece as a binary of mostly class structure. Dewey says the separation of liberal education from professional and industrial education goes back to the time of the Greeks and was formulated expressly on the basis of a division of classes into those who had to labor for a living and those who were relieved from this necessity. Essentially what he's saying is that there were people in ancient Greek society who were forced to toil and labor to provide food, to provide sustenance, to make sure all of the infrastructure is working correctly. Those are the people that are laboring, and the people that actually have the time to think about philosophy, mathematics, and so on are the people that have much more wealth. So there's a class stratification here that creates this binary in the first place. He goes on to say, even if we insist that the interests connected with getting a living are only material and hence intrinsically lower than those connected with enjoyment of time released from labor, and even if it were admitted that there is something engrossing and insubordinate in material interests which leads them to strive to usurp the place belonging to the higher ideal interests, this would not, barring the fact of socially divided classes, lead to neglect of the kind of education which trains people for the useful pursuits. It would rather lead to scrupulous care for them, so that people were trained to be efficient in them and yet to keep them in their place. Education would see to it that we avoided the evil results which flow from their being allowed to flourish in obscure purulence of neglect. Only when a division of these interests coincides with a division of an inferior and superior social class will preparation for useful work be looked down upon with contempt as an unworthy thing, a fact which prepares one for the conclusion that the rigid identification of work with material interests and leisure with ideal interests is itself a social product. The key here is to understand that this divide between labor and leisure is built upon a class notion of thinking of the lesser folks, the lesser class, as being the ones that need to maintain our world. But Dewey thinks it's very important here to let us know that actually caring for the world and putting in that labor, putting in that effort in an environment where it makes sense, where we feel like we have agency, where we feel like we can cultivate our environments, is not something to be looked down upon, and often to be sort of celebrated as part of the human experience. However, Dewey also notes in Democracy and Education that we live in times where market forces, the brutal market forces that are sort of pushing down on our lives, make it so that there's still a large separation between labor and leisure even today. Even though the leisure, for the most part of people today, may not have anything to do with the sciences or philosophy or anything like that. They're much less educated probably than they were back in the day. But it used to be that many scientific discoveries were only able to be done by rich aristocrats who had the time and the money to be able to do these things. So the reason why I went off and talked about John Dewey for a little bit was because I think that these sort of separations between labor and leisure are still very much so present in our daily lives. We have dealt with this binary of labor and leisure, this separation, two categories. It's really come to frame our mindset. For example, for a lot of labor history and the socialist tradition, it's very common to say, well, we just want more leisure time. We just want more time off, less time on the job. We want a 4-day work week. We want less hours, right? And I'm in support of all of these things. I think these are necessary for people to live even just a little bit better lives. However, we're still working within the same logic, the same harmful binary that has been set up for a very long time. It's not that humans don't want to work, don't want to do labor. It's just that we want to be able to do labor that makes sense for us, and of course, a lot of the sort of socialist and communist history would agree with that. That was one of Marx's major points. But I think we've gotten lost in these ideas of you're either playing or you're working, and they don't really help to understand ourselves or the world we come from. So while John Dewey's ideas of democracy and education and perfect sort of melding and accompanying of labor and leisure to sort of make our lives make more sense so that we don't really have these sort of pressures of labor and leisure make a lot of sense, I think that our current times add a lot of major problems. The first and I think biggest one is that we live in extremely complicated times. Just think about all of the things in your home. If you're living somewhere, how many of those things can you understand? And you understand how they work. So for me, like, I have a stool under me. Well, the stool under me, I don't know where it was made. I don't know where this metal was made. The wood under me, I don't know how this wood was laid on here. I don't know the physics. How do you get, like, I'm in an apartment building. How do you stack floors, sturdy floors, and keep things level? I have computers on my desk. I don't know. I know the basic in and out of how they work, but I don't know where the pieces were manufactured. I don't know what's going to happen to them after they go away. I don't know all the history of the neighborhood I live in. This guitar behind me, I don't know where that was made. I know some of the pieces of what put it together, but I don't know most of them. I don't know the sewage system. Like, I don't know, like, when I go to the bathroom, I don't it just disappears, I guess. Like I guess it goes into the sewage somewhere, but I read in college, I read a book on the history of sort of water systems and stuff like that. And so I know a little bit, but you know, the point I'm making here is that we're largely aliens to the world that has been set up for us. We don't really know what they do, their history, where they come from. And as we get technologies that continue to give more power in our hands, things like AI, we are becoming even more lost. We don't know what it means to live in the times we live in. I've been thinking of it as almost like we're rats in the cage of our own making. We and our ancestors made this cage that we're living in, and we can't get out, right? Like if I was to be like, oh, I want to leave New York City. I want to, go live out in nature somewhere. Like I don't know. I don't have the skills, right? Like I don't know what's going on. Like I said earlier, when we are kids playing with our friends on the playground, things make sense. Our world makes sense. I'm playing around with my hands. I'm learning and experimenting with the world. But as soon as we start to get older and we realize, oh, why did I go to that school instead of this school? Why was my family in this neighborhood and not that one? What are these technologies being produced and how do they have an impact on our lives? All of a sudden, we feel alienated. We feel lost. In these lost times, it's become much easier to be conflicted about our own actions. If we are having leisure, we are hanging out with friends, we might feel, oh, but I really got to get back to work. I really got to go back and work on something. Likewise, you may be working on something, you're like, oh, but my life is passing me by. Like, my life is passing by and I'm not experiencing the world. What does that mean? We are constantly in this ping pong, back and forth. And it's because we've lost a touch with our own creativity. Now, that's not the only thing. Of course, there's structures that prevent us from doing that. But still, the point remains is that we don't have an understanding of what it means to comprehend the world around us. So, of course, we're going to feel lost. The last thing I'll say really fast is that, therefore, it makes sense that every year, hundreds of self-help books are going to be published. A massive industry is going to exist off of the purgatory, the perpetual confusion of the people. You're going to get self-help books that say, look, you just got to lock in, right? You gotta be that main character to set yourself up for success. And then you're going to get the anti-self-help books that say, actually, no. You got to make sure you know that capitalism is trying to rob you of your life, right? You're going to be robbed of your life if you don't give yourself the time to rest, We're just going to be locked in this back and forth, and it's never going to end. And to be completely honest with you all, I don't really see much of a way out. A way out may be in terms of finding your own joy outside of work, where you're able to really work on something you enjoy. But then again, like, you're just going to get caught back into the algorithm, right? Like, I work on music, and I'm like working on music, and I'm like, check my phone, and I'm like scrolling. And then while I'm scrolling, I'm like, oh shit, well, I should probably be working on more music or writing or whatever, right? And then I get sold those devices on social media, say, this is for you. So ultimately, while I'm not super optimistic about this picture, I think that we'll sort of always find ourselves locked in this ping pong effect of productivity and anti-productivity. I think that we can start to understand maybe why that's the case, and that can give us a little bit more freedom in there. I also think that sort of discovering what makes the world work is fascinating, right? Like, it's really interesting to see how we've gotten to where we've gotten.